about gene expression. Genes are a section of DNA that code for a specific trait or a specific purpose. So that could be the color of your eyes, the ability to digest certain things, your predisposition for certain diseases. So a gene is a section of DNA. And so gene expression is that definition that you see up here of the cell's ability to turn genes on and off. And we'll spend a whole next unit, talking about genes. But we're going to use two examples, two cells, liver cell and a nerve cell. Liver cell, so I drew this, and here you have the DNA, it's in blue. And over here you've got a nerve cell. Both of these are not very pretty cells, or pretty drawings, but you get the point. There's DNA inside of this cell. Both of these cells have the same DNA. And that may be weird because you look at this and this does not look like this. But all of your living cells, just about every single one of your living cells has the same DNA, all of your DNA. And the thing is that some of that DNA is not needed in that cell, but it still has that DNA. So another thing that can affect the gene expression is the environment. So the environment, two examples of this would be tanning and chlorophyll. So if you go outside, when you go outside, if you're outside for long periods of time, your skin will tend to turn darker. It may turn very dark or just slightly dark, but it will be darker. And so what's happening is your skin is responding to sunlight and creating more melanin because that protects you from damaging rays from the sun. And chlorophyll, we could see something else. We see another example of this in chlorophyll. So a plant, if you've ever done a sprouted bean or something like that, you know that you put the sprout in in the soil, and then you water it, and that seed will grow roots down into the soil, and it will grow what will be a stem and leaves up out of the soil. But it's white. The stem that's coming up is white until it breaks the surface of the soil, and it doesn't have eyes like we would think of eyes on the plant. What it has is it has receptors that can tell when the sunlight is hitting it, and when it does, those cells start creating chlorophyll, so that they can start, instead of using the seed's energy, the stored energy in the seed, it will now be able to photosynthesize using chlorophyll in the chloroplast. So we see that the environment can affect gene expression. And all this is happening with this over here. So we have a chromosome, which is an example of the chromosome, and one section of that is the DNA. One section of that is a gene. So if you zoom in all the way into the chromosome, you'll see strands of DNA, long strands of DNA, and a gene is made up of a lot of base pairs together. And so when I looked it up, this is just a quick Google, said that the average genes have about 3,000 base pairs, which is massive. So when we draw 5, 10, a dozen base pairs together, but in reality it's going to be huge numbers. So here's a question to pose. How does a liver cell and a nerve cell, they have both things of DNA, how do they even get there? So when a sperm fertilizes an egg, you have what's called a zygote. We've talked about that in the past. And then eventually you have these things called stem cells. These are the cells that are not specific to any one task. So they're not things that can filter blood, they're not things that make blood, they're not cells that communicate. These stem cells, in the same way, they don't communicate in the same way like a nerve cell would. These stem cells have the ability to turn into these other cells. So a liver cell, a stem cell can become a liver cell, a different stem cell, or a stem cell right beside it could turn into a nerve cell, and one could become, a student just blurted out, egg cell. So I wrote that up there. These cells, these stem cells, can become these other cells. That's where these other cells come from. So when you are a single cell, when the sperm fertilizes the egg, you're a single cell. You have all the DNA to make all of the cells that make you up. And so another thing that may come into your mind is, if this DNA, we talked about in class, this DNA is 6 feet long. Each of your cells have a nucleus with DNA that adds up to about 6 feet of DNA, which is huge. As small as it is, that is a lot of DNA. So why does that liver cell have the DNA to make a nerve cell? Because it does. Why does that nerve cell have the DNA to make up a epithelial cell or a skin cell? So how does this happen? A promoter gene turns on and off. And so a promoter, if you think of a promoter as a hype person, say a store nearby, or a club, or a place where people go and have fun, that is it's opening up, and you are hired as their promoter. So you're going to blast social media, maybe put up flyers, just let all your friends know there's this cool place to go to hang out. You are promoting that place. And so in genes, in the DNA, if this promoter gene is turned on, that section of DNA will then will follow that path of the central dogma from DNA to RNA to protein. And it will make protein, amino acids into a chain. It'll make protein. If it's turned off, that DNA will not make RNA. So in this liver cell, when the nerve cell was forming, there's genes in the DNA of this nerve cell to make liver cells, but those genes were turned off. Those promoter genes were turned off. So let's look down here, another way of showing this. I've got a DNA. I try to draw this strand and this strand the same. This over here is the DNA that would be in a liver cell. This would be in a nerve cell. And the DNA for making alcohol dehydrogenase is, that's a gene. So there's a gene for making that. That is needed for liver cells. That's not needed for nerve cells. So in liver cells, that gene, the promoter, is on. So you see this section, these sections in liver cells it's turned on, in nerve cells it's turned off. In nerve cells, we've got a neurotransmitter gene. Nerves are made for, this neurotransmitter gene is helpful for communication. In the liver cell, it's turned off. In the nerve cell, it's turned on. So we see these gene expressions, all kind of the takeaway. Your DNA in all of your cells, it has what it needs to make all of the other things. It has the information needed to make all other cells in your body, but it does not make all the other cells in your body. It made that specific cell. The nerve cell turns certain genes on and turns certain genes off, and then it makes the proteins needed for that task, to accomplish that task.